Hello everybody and welcome to the channel. In today's video, we have a thought-provoking presentation by evolutionary astrologer Daniel Fiverson titled The Pluto Paradigm, Pluto in the Natal Chart, Houses 1 through 6. There is the use of the 12-letter alphabet in this presentation, and we understand this is not everybody's cup of tea, but we are a big tent and open to many different perspectives. And lastly, if you wish to view our current class, workshop and webinar offerings, please visit keplercollege.org. And without further ado, let's get into the video.
Welcome to part 2 of the Pluto paradigm. My name is Daniel Fiverson. I'm an evolutionary astrologer trained and certified by the Jeffrey Wolf Green School of Evolutionary Astrology. I'm an astrological intuitive and have studied astrology, tarot, and I Ching since the 1960s. I publish regular forecasts, astrological forecasts under the banner of the Astrological Weather Report. In this presentation, I will focus on the personal astrological weather experienced by the house where Pluto is in your natal chart. I will discuss Pluto's placement through the houses from the first house to the sixth house. Part 2 will be forthcoming in the next few weeks. I encourage you to watch the first part of this series, The Pluto Paradigm, that's on the Kepler College YouTube channel. We know the whats of our lives, but do we know the whys? Who am I? Why am I here? What are my lessons? We know the whats of our lives, but do we know the whys? We might understand how the sun and moon in our natal charts express our personalities, and how the ascendant describes how we meet the world. But do we know why the circumstances of our lives have unfolded the way they have? Do we know why the people who helped or hurt us came into our lives when they did? Pluto in your chart holds the answer to all of these questions. Pluto is the base note of our natal chart. In evolutionary astrology, the entry point into the chart to solve the astrological puzzle is not the sun, the moon, or the ascendant, it's Pluto. Pluto correlates directly to the soul and to the natural law of evolution. The soul is an immutable consciousness of finite identity that persists from lifetime to lifetime. The soul, our higher self, your guardian angel, however you frame it, is the source and an extension of who and what we are. It is the part of us that exists outside of time and space. We are not human beings having a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings having a human experience. Each lifetime is the experience of our soul having that human experience. The soul manifests a human personality with subjective consciousness and unconsciousness lifetime after lifetime. It's been suggested that time is not linear. Instead, consider that it is all happening simultaneously. Someone once asked God, "Why did you create time?" He or she answered, "So that everything would not happen all at once." Understanding the individual's life context is important to understand their natal chart, and this information must be gathered to unravel the chart's archetypal patterns. Every chart has 3 axes. The position of the planets represent time. The houses represent geographical space. There is a 3rd axis, which is the consciousness of the individual whose chart is being read. This 3rd axis of the chart is perpendicular to the planets and houses, and it is the individual's life story and the level of their self-awareness which determines how the archetypes are expressed. Each archetype has a full spectrum of expression from distortion to enlightenment. According to Jeffrey Wolf Green, the method of evolutionary astrology, there are 3 primary evolutionary states: consensus, individuating, and spiritualizing. The evolution of consciousness is like a musical keyboard. We have both hands on the keyboard, playing lower, middle, and perhaps higher notes. Understanding the querent's place along this evolutionary spectrum is imperative. We're all on the same path, but we are all at different mile markers. We pick up where we left off. Pluto encapsulates what has come before, our karmic history, our emotional memory. We don't remember our past lives intellectually, but from lifetime to lifetime, we do pick up wherever we left off. It's the emotional experiences of our first 7 years up to our first Saturn square that are the reminders of where we left off in our evolutionary path. It comes from our emotional body. The soul has desires just like we do. Pluto correlates to the desires of the soul that have led to this current lifetime and the desires that set its evolutionary needs in motion. I work with a house system based on the 12-letter astrological alphabet. The first house is formatted by the Aries-Mars archetype. The second house is Taurus-Venus. The third house is Mercury-Gemini, and so on. Someone with Pluto in the first house is an Aries soul. With Pluto in the 10th house, they are a Capricorn soul. Pluto in the 12th house is a Pisces soul, and so on. Each house alternates in polarity and succession between yang, male or day energy, energy moving outward from the center, and yin, female or night energy, moving inwards back towards the center. The first house is formatted with the Aries archetype. The second house, Pluto is the base node of the chart. It carries the imprint of what the soul has worked on in the past, carried forward into this lifetime. The polarity point of Pluto, known as the PPP, is the format for the soul's future development in this current lifetime. All of the other planets in the chart provide support the Pluto paradigm in this way and will unfold according to what the Pluto paradigm is outlining. The outer planets will shape and format the consciousness and unconscious parts of the self and the generational influences. The planetary conditions of the Sun, Moon, and personal planets, Mercury, Venus, and Mars, will format the nature of the personality. The house placement of the planet that rules the house Pluto is in, any sign it rules, and the house it rules will add intensity and dimension. The lunar nodes, if resident, will add karmic intensity. So those born with Pluto in the first house are Aries souls. The ascendant or rising sign, the point in the sky on the eastern horizon at birth, delineates the first house. This is the birth point. It's involution, spirit into matter. As human beings, we come into the world head first, eyes wide open, not knowing if someone will be there to catch us before we hit the floor. The first house is purely instinctive expression. This is Mars, cardinal fire. The ascendant is how we meet the world. Mars, Aries, and the first house are male or day energy, and yang energy moves outward from the center. It's ruled by Mars. The first house is instinctive, it's impulsive, and it's totally non-cognitive. It's like the tip of our noses. Our instinctive behavior is mostly invisible to us, but others can see it. Some Western astrology presents the first house as a projection. The projection is Libra and the 7th house. Aries is the fire element, the cardinal sign of the fire triad that continues through Leo and Aquarius and Sagittarius. Fire is spirit, and this fire triad correlates to the self-actualization process, who we are becoming. Aries souls are learning about themselves by trial and error. They meet the world head-on. This is called neti-neti. Not this, not this. It's what the Hindus call it. Aries souls require freedom to act independently, and they tolerate no restrictions. They are anchored in who they believe themselves to be. They can be stubborn and immovable. They are often very sure of themselves and entirely self-directed. There's a forceful approaches to life situations, and they need to learn to balance their need for freedom with their need for relationships, which is the Libra polarity point. The polarity point in the seventh house of relationship of Libra potentiates balance and initiates the need for relationships with others. The process of self-discovery creates a feeling that there's something that they can learn about themselves through interactions with others. This is the projection. We see ourselves in the mirror of others. There is something in the other that is in us. Leo and the seventh house reflect back at us as a mirror to the soul. As an example of the first house, I've chosen William Lilly. William Lilly was a famous 17th century astrologer and magician who lived during one of the most turbulent times in English history. Like so many of his generation, he had to deal with the plague and was drawn into the madness of the English Civil War. Lilly lived in a time of enormous religious and social upheaval, but his astrology remained the outer expression of his magical worldview, based on Hermetic and Neoplatonic principles rooted in the 16th century. Through his social and political connections, he developed his stature as the most important astrologer in England and had an indelible impact on the future course of Western astrological tradition. Born the son of a yeoman farmer, he secured his fortune by marrying his former master's widow, which allowed him to study astrology. He published Christian Astrology, a huge compendium of astrological techniques. This was the first of its kind to be printed in English language rather than Latin, and is said to have tutored a nation in crisis in the language of the stars, first published in 1647 in 3 separate volumes. It was so popular and gave such great insight into horary astrology that it has never been totally out of print. To his supporters, he was an English Merlin. To his detractors, he was a juggling wizard and impostor. He was known for his specialty in interpreting astrological charts for horary questions, in which an astrologer would try to find the answer to a question by drawing up a horoscope for the exact time and place when the question was asked. Lilly began publishing yearly prophetic almanacs. His first, published in 1644, told of the king's defeat at the Battle of Naseby in 1645. These yearly almanacs eventually established him as England's leading astrologer. So we see in his chart that he was born with Pluto in Aries in his first house. He was a pioneer. He was not afraid to take chances. His work was filled with new ideas, and he was also being ruled by Venus in Taurus and Pluto polarity point. He was full of self-reliance. His Mars was in the 7th house in Virgo, so he was pretty much a people person, and he was an initiator and a connector, and he was also quite controversial. His south node of Pluto, I'm introducing the concept of the nodes of Pluto here. We're all familiar with the nodes of the moon, which is the intersection of the ecliptic with the moon's orbit around the Earth twice a month. But all of the planets also intersect the ecliptic over different time frames. Pluto happens to have a time frame of 2,000 years. But what is important here is to understand that the two things that really are at the basis of the chart are the Pluto polarity point here in Libra, and this was his work with others and his relationship with others, and all of the other planets, though I have not delineated all of their meanings, all dance to that tune. That's the way any chart works. We look at Pluto and Pluto's polarity point opposite. Up here, it would be up in the in the 7th house. And so we see that the 7th house ruled by Virgo is quite important. And whereas Pluto polarity point here would be at 25 degrees of Libra, not quite conjunct to his Jupiter. So the point is that this Pluto polarity point, this work of the seventh house, is the base note, the baseline of how all the other planets are going to work, and all of the north nodes of each of the other planets as well also are in line with the Pluto polarity point. The south node of his Pluto polarity point is conjunct the moon. His ego, his sense of who he was, is very tightly tied to this Plutonian self-empowerment, and it's in Capricorn, in his sense of authority about himself, and his the work that he did in the world. The north node of Pluto was in Cancer, and it had to do with his sharing. It was about justice, which was very important to him. Here we see it conjunct, widely conjunct asteroid Astrea, but here in the here in his 1, 2, 3, 4, fifth house, we see that this north node of Pluto is very important in terms of his development of who he is going forward in this lifetime and in future lifetimes to come, to self-actualize and develop his ability to work with others, almost as if the world was his family. South node in Pluto is innovative. He was an intellectual outsider with his moon in Capricorn. It also represents in the 11th house. It also represents his astrology, and his moon is naturally authoritative, as I said, with his Capricorn. The north node in Pluto in Cancer in his 5th house is his ability to have self-actualized over many lifetimes. But continue to self-actualize who he is and become very highly intellectually creative. So the 2nd house correlates to Taurus and its ruler Venus. This is the fixed expression of the earth element. Those born with Pluto in the 2nd house are Taurus souls. Taurus is the yin, the inward-facing expression of Venus. Taurus grounds, centers, and it stabilizes. The Aryan energies stabilizes the Aries energies back into the earth. In the 1st house, we are born. In the 2nd house, we recognize we're here. What have I brought with me to survive? The 2nd house really determines our priorities. Again, it's Venus. Our values and our priorities become most important in life. And the priority that's at the top of the list is survival. Taurus correlates to the biological instinct for survival. It becomes sex as the procreation of the species. Whatever is necessary to survive correlates to our values. It creates meaning and it sets our priorities. People born with Pluto in the 2nd house tend to have a strong survival instinct and sexual nature. Taurus represents self-reliance and self-containment. In past lives, they needed to withdraw into themselves to develop their value systems. So in this lifetime, they tend to over-isolate, get cut off from the greater life, stay content in their small space, giving them a sense of control. The need for survival can lead to a desire to over-accumulate material goods, money, possessions, elaborate homes, food and wine, and the good life. Venus is the goddess of relationship. We know her young outer expression of Venus in Libra is our relationship with others. But in Taurus, it's our relationship with ourselves. We each emit an energetic frequency correlating to the quotient of our self-love, according the spectrum from self-hate to unconditional self-love to conditional self-love to unconditional self-love. Most of us are somewhere in the middle of that spectrum. There are things about ourselves that we might be proud of and things that we are not so proud of and hide from others. We abandon those disliked parts of ourselves and bury them in our subconscious. However, those fragments of ourselves are still active below the level of our conscious awareness. Astrologically, Venus correlates to magnetism. Our self-love quotient is an energetic frequency that we broadcast 7 by 24. It's in our etheric field. It is undetectable by ourselves, but implicitly perceived by everyone else. This is what is called the law of attraction. Yes, it can be about money and possessions, but what we attract is a function of what we think we deserve. There is a natural inconjunct, 158 degrees, between Taurus and Libra, our relationship with ourselves and our relationship with others. This inconjunct indicates that a crisis necessitates an adjustment. Jeffrey Wolf Green taught that this natural crisis generates the need to be self-reliant and fulfill our needs, but it is also how our needs can be projected onto others. We become dependent by creating expectations that others can satisfy our own needs. Crises will occur when our projected expectations do not materialize. This crisis forces the person back upon themselves so self-reliance can be developed. Only Jeffrey Wolf Green's Evolutionary Astrology teaches this total understanding of the Venus archetype. Pluto's polarity point in the 8th house will lead the Taurus nature into confrontations that will reveal the limits of their value systems and shake them out of isolation. The 8th house teaches that there is more to life than material values. They will have to open up and merge with others. They will discover how they have limited themselves by being overly isolated and having values that are too fixed. The 8th house represents a major metamorphosis, causing people with Pluto in the 2nd house to begin to open up. These people tend to change slowly, creating the possibility of cataclysmic change on an 8th house Pluto Scorpio archetype. They can learn how to merge with others without becoming codependent. So the example I have here is Van the Man. George Ivan Morrison was born on the 31st of August, 1945 in Belfast, Northern Ireland, as the only child of George Morrison, a shipyard electrician, and Violet Morrison, who had been a singer and tap dancer in her youth. Morrison's family were working-class Protestants descended from the Ulster Scots population that settled in Belfast. From 1950 to 1956, he began to be known as Van. His father had what was at the time one of the largest record collections in Northern Ireland, acquired during his time in Detroit, Michigan in the early 1950s. And the young Morrison grew up listening to artists such as Jelly Roll Morton, Ray Charles, Leadbelly, of whom he later said, "If it weren't for the guys like Ray, I wouldn't be where I am today. Those guys were the inspiration that got me going. If it wasn't for that kind of music, I couldn't be doing what I'm doing now." His father's record collection exposed him to various musical genres, such as the blues of Muddy Waters, the gospel of Mahalia Jackson, the jazz of Charlie Parker, the folk music of Woody Guthrie, and country music from Hank Williams and Jimmy Rogers. Father brought him Jimmy Rogers. His father bought him his first acoustic guitar when he was 11, and he learned to play rudimentary chords from the songbook, The Carter Family Style. Featuring his characteristic growl, a mix of folk, blues, soul, jazz, gospel, and Ulster Scots Celtic influences, many rock historians widely consider Morrison to be one of the most unusual and influential vocalists in the history of rock and roll. Morrison has written hundreds of songs during his career, with a recurring theme reflecting a nostalgic yearning for the carefree days of his childhood in Belfast. His spiritually themed style of music first came into full expression with Astral Weeks. During the COVID-19 pandemic, Morrison made numerous statements against social distancing measures that affected live music events and made calls to, quote, fight pseudoscience. The Northern Ireland health minister accused Morrison of smearing public health practitioners and called Morrison's anti-lockdown songs dangerous. Morrison and his family have been affiliated with an Anglican congregation of the Church of Ireland located in East Belfast. During the Troubles, the area was described as militantly Protestant, though Morrison's parents have always been free thinkers, with his father openly declaring himself an atheist and his mother being connected to Jehovah's Witnesses at one point. Morrison had been linked to Scientology the early 1980s and even thanked its founder, L. Ron Hubbard, in one of his songs. Later, he became wary of religion, saying, "I wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole." He said it is important to distinguish spirituality from religion. Spirituality is one thing. Religion can mean anything from soup to nuts, you know? But it generally means an organization. So I really don't like to use the word because that's what it really means. It means this church or that church. But spirituality is different because that's the individual. All of these statements clearly recognize his Pluto fourth house in Leo, ruled by his sun in Virgo. The Pluto polarity point is Aquarius in the eighth house, ruled by Uranus in Gemini. So again, you can hear the unconventionality of his opinion of spirituality and religion, just based on his Pluto and his PPP alone. The north node of his Pluto, the south node of Pluto is in Capricorn in the seventh house, and it's ruled by Saturn in Cancer. Saturn in Cancer is conjunct the north node in Pluto here, and it's his authoritative self-expression and creativity. And Cancer is the imprint, the clear imprint from his father, and his family in terms of his music and his lifestyle. He has spent previous lifetimes, south node of Pluto, seventh house, working on his emotional self-reliance. And here, what we're looking at, just got to look at my notes here a little bit. His Pluto, his south node is Pluto in Capricorn. His north node Pluto in Cancer. We've got Saturn and the Moon in play here. So his self-image, the way that he describes himself and the way he expresses himself, stretches right across this axis from Earth, first house to seventh house. His Moon in Gemini, he easily vocalized his north node of Pluto in Cancer, ruled by the Moon in Gemini. He easily vocalized his emotional self-expression through his music, and he dedicated to sharing his heart with the world. His Pluto in Leo, in his second house, he is a Leo soul. It was his self-reliance. It was ruled by the sun in Virgo in his fourth house. So it's about his self-reliance, his self-expression, and his self-development, Virgo. The Pluto polarity point to his Pluto is in Aquarius. A highly individualized musical proficiency. He was not afraid to be different. He had Eris and Aries retrograde trining his Pluto, and Mars in Gemini, his musical voice in the world. Clearly, expressing that different, not afraid to have a different voice in the world, which came through his wonderful music. Saturn was the ruler of the south node in Pluto, and it's conjunct the north node of Pluto in his first house. You see it here. This is his self-authorized personal expression and a deep sense of personal authenticity that was underscored by a Vesta Ceres conjunction in Scorpio, squaring Pluto. You can see Vesta. Vesta and Ceres here, squaring Pluto. So the third house is the archetype of Gemini, ruled by Mercury. Those with Pluto in the third house are Gemini souls. Like Venus, Mercury rules two signs. Excuse me. Gemini is Mercury's outer yang expression. Virgo is Mercury's inner yin expression. People born with Pluto in the third house are Gemini souls. In the third house, we become aware of the world around us, the space around us, our siblings, our immediate environment, and our neighborhood. Gemini is the adaptable, mutable expression of the air element. It is mental and concerned with thoughts and ideas. Security is based on our understanding of things. We learn to speak and develop language skills to communicate and share our thoughts and ideas with others. And in Gemini, our intellectual curiosity develops. Gemini souls have a past life emphasis on developing the mind and intellect. They must find a rational way to explain their relationships to their environment. There is intellectual restlessness. Security is about understanding the world around them. They must find a rational way to explain their relationship to their environment. Relationships with others, Libra, the cardinal expression of the air element, is needed. It needs to be engaged to process themselves. The third house in Gemini correlates to the lower rational mind. Pluto in the third house people are intellectually restless due to the need to constantly take in new information. There is a mental restlessness that needs to collect more and more facts. They cobble together this data and ideas, hoping to weave it into a single paradigm. Everything is seen as being relative. In the final analysis, there is no way to tie it all together. There are too many facts to arrange in too many interrelated ways. The sense of security dissolves when new facts undermine what is already known. And this crisis can lead to cycles of intellectual implosion and then expansion. The Pluto polarity point in the ninth house initiates the intention to develop the right brain and intuitive nature. The left brain's intellectual nature is already highly developed from past life experiences. These individuals need to find the deeper meaning of the collected facts. They need to understand the natural laws that are the basis of life. Over time, they learn to become less granular. A holistic conception of reality can emerge using intuition and the higher mind. Uranus and Pluto and Pallas Athena, the goddess of wisdom and strategy, who act as the octave transformer between Mercury, the lower octave rational mind, and Uranus, the higher octave irrational mind. They learn to integrate the Mercurial left brain and Sagittarius right brain to see the bigger picture. The example I've got here is Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King was born in Atlanta, Georgia on January 15th, 1929. He was a Baptist minister and social activist who led the civil rights movement in the United States from the mid-1950s until his death by assassination in 1968. His leadership was fundamental to that movement's success in ending the legal segregation of African Americans in the South and other parts of the United States. King rose to national prominence as head of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, which promoted nonviolent tactics, such as the massive March on Washington in 1963 to achieve civil rights. He was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1964. King came from a comfortable middle-class family steeped in Southern Black ministry tradition. His father and maternal grandfather were Baptist preachers. His parents were college-educated. Young Martin received a solid education and grew up in a loving, extended family. This secure upbringing, however, did not prevent King from experiencing the prejudices they shared in the South. He never forgot the time when, about age 6, one of his white playmates announced that his parents would no longer allow him to play with King because the children were now attending segregated schools. Dearest to King in all those years was his maternal grandmother, whose death in 1941 left him shaken and unstable. Upset because he had learned of her fatal heart attack while attending a parade without his parents' permission, the 12-year-old king attempted suicide by jumping from a second-story window. So we see that MLK is a third house, Gemini Soul, Pluto in Cancer retrograde in his third house, ruled by the moon in Pisces in his 11th house. And the polarity point is the Capricorn in his 9th house, ruled by Saturn in Sagittarius in his 8th house. There was a karmic foundation to his work with the moon in Pisces ruling his sun. And his sun in Capricorn in the 9th house is conjunct Pluto in the 9th, and the sun in the 9th house is opposite Pluto Cancer retrograde in the 3rd house. His Saturn, which rules his sun, is in Sagittarius in his 8th house. So he was an authority for civil rights in his time. The moon in Pisces in the 11th house trined Pluto in Cancer retrograde in his 3rd house. And its rule, and Venus also in Pisces in the 11th house. So I'm not sure what my note here means. Just bear with me a second here. Venus in Pisces in his 11th. There was a deep, intense compassion for his beliefs connected to his Pluto in Cancer. And he also had Neptune at 0 degrees of Virgo in his 4th house in terms of how he saw himself and his own personal spirituality. As Mercury was in Aquarius, he was not afraid to be different and speak out. He put his life on the line, and as a result, actually lost his life for his efforts. There was an intense life expression as a spiritual and public leader. Asteroid Estrella in Aries in the 12th is squaring his Pluto, and it's ruled by Mars in Gemini retrograde in the 2nd. It's squaring his Pluto in Cancer. He fought intensely against the injustice of racism. And Juno in Scorpio in the 7th house is trining his Pluto in Cancer retrograde in the 3rd. He never lost his faith in the causes that he believed in. In Cancer in the 4th house, we give ourselves a name and an identity. Who am I and how I feel? Cancer is a cardinal sign ruled by the moon. Each cardinal sign, Aries, Cancer, Libra, and Capricorn, signifies that a new cycle is beginning. The 1st house is our energetic body. The 2nd house is our physical body. The 3rd house is our mental body. And the 4th house is our emotional body. The lesson in the 4th house is that security is internal and not found in parents, jobs, lovers, homes, or money. In Cancer, we learn how to develop our own emotional self-reliance. The moon is the most conscious part of our psyches and the focal point of our awareness. The core desire of the soul is security. Each cardinal sign signifies that a new cycle is beginning. The moon and Cancer, the sign it rules, correlate to security by finding emotional self-reliance. The moon correlates to the emotional body. Our emotions are the body's litmus test for security. The moon responds or reacts through our emotional experiences in each moment. The moon is the most conscious part of our psyches and the focal point of our awareness. The lesson of the 4th house is that security is eternal and not found in jobs, parents, lovers, homes, or money. That bears repeating. Ego is not a bad word. The moon is our self-image, how we see ourselves. It is our ego. Ego is not a bad word. The moon performs the function of a lens on a movie projector. Without the lens, there is no clear image. The moon performs the function of telling us when we are safe or in danger. Without that lens, there's no clear image and no clear understanding of where we are in the world at any given moment. Many Pluto in the 4th house people are born into difficult family situations. One or both parents did not provide the child with healthy emotional experiences. The emotional needs were not met. This is a challenging environment for a child. This forces them back upon themselves. They realize early in life that they must learn to fulfill their emotional needs for themselves. Most of these people have had a series of past lives in similar conditions. Often they have prior life unresolved karma with one or both parents. In romantic relationships, they can draw in partners with psychological makeups similar to one or both parents. The unconscious need is again to resolve the unresolved karmas and fulfill their emotional needs. Because the partner's nature is identical to the nature of the parents, the needs are still unmet, and once again they're thrown back in on themselves. They must learn how to supply their emotional needs and find internal security. All fourth house Pluto people experience a wide range of emotions intensely. Everything is deeply felt. We grow through direct emotional experience. An external experience often triggers the moods. This leads to self-knowledge and ultimately inner security. The polarity point in the 10th house creates the acceptance of responsibility for their actions, emotional security, Capricorn functions, and how to integrate their personality into society. This learning occurs through work and career. They can escape victim mode by projecting themselves out into the social sphere. They begin to realize that their childhood conditions were a karmic necessity for their evolution, and that their parental figures' lack of nurturing was required. Every one of us as a child must at some times accept that our parents did the best that they could for us, the best that they knew, to the best of their ability, and forgive them for whatever happened. RBG, notorious, is the person I have selected for the Pluto in the fourth for the Cancer personality. She was born on March 15th, 1933, and was an American lawyer and jurist who served as an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States from 1993 until she died in 2020. She was viewed as a moderate consensus builder. Ginsburg was the first Jewish woman and second woman to serve on the court after Sandra Day O'Connor. Later in her tenure, Ginsburg received attention for passionate dissents that reflected liberal views of the law. She was popularly dubbed the notorious RBG, a moniker she later embraced. Ginsburg was born and grew up in Brooklyn, New York. Her older sister Marilyn died of meningitis at the age of 6 when she was a baby, and her mother died shortly after before she graduated from high school. She earned her bachelor's degree at Cornell University and married, become a mother before starting law school at Harvard, where she was among the few women in her class. Ginsburg transferred to Columbia Law School, where she graduated joint first in her class. During the early 1960s, she co-authored a book with a Swedish jurist that profoundly influenced her thinking on gender equality. She became a professor at Rutgers Law School and Columbia Law School, teaching civil procedure as one of the few women in her field. Ginsburg spent much of her legal career advocating for gender equality and women's rights, winning many arguments before the Supreme Court. Between O'Connor's retirement in 2006 and the appointment of Sonia Sotomayor in 2009, she was the only female justice on the Supreme Court. During that time, Ginsburg became more forceful with her dissents. So she has her Pluto in Cancer, ruled by the moon in Scorpio. And we can see, obviously, her care for others and her care for the world, and especially her care for women and the whole process of women and motherhood. The Pluto polarity point was in Capricorn in her 10th, ruled by Saturn in Aquarius. She was her own self-authority, though she was clearly had fringe ideas, not just for the Supreme Court, but for the world in which she lived and grew up in. Her north node of Pluto let me just see, look at my notes here. Her Pluto in Cancer, ruled by the moon in Scorpio, is this deep sense of self and her purpose. And her Pluto polarity point, that she found her truth in the place of society outside the box. That was her Saturn, ruled by Saturn in Aquarius. The south node of Pluto in Capricorn, also ruled by Saturn in Aquarius, is how she stood in her authority, personally and publicly, and took up the cause for community, with her north node in Pluto in Cancer in her fourth house, ruled by the moon in Scorpio in her eighth, was her deep, passionate expression in her work. Her Pluto in Cancer retrograde in the fourth was conjunct the north node of Pluto in Cancer. It was her karmic intention. It's the work that she was intended to fulfill and pursue in this lifetime going forward. And her Uranus in Aries was partile square Pluto. She had a highly individual approach to her role as one of the Supremes. Asteroid Estrella in Aries is squaring Pluto, ruled by Mars in Virgo, retrograde in the sixth. She had a deep commitment to fight injustice. And her sun in Pisces, the 12th, is also trining Pluto, which correlated to her deep compassion and her deep understanding that was the foundation of her legal work, her compassion for others and her deep understanding of what was really right and wrong. It was ruled by Venus in Pisces in the 12th trine Pluto, and Neptune in Virgo, retrograde in the sixth. Her values and priorities supported her work. Hygeia in Scorpio trines Pluto, her moon in Scorpio trines Pluto, and Pluto in Cancer, ruled by Pluto in Cancer, retrograde in the fourth, again, is this deep emotional baseline for her approach to apply the meaning of what was right or wrong. The fifth house is Leo's den. It's ruled by the sun. And those with Leo in the fifth house are Leo souls. Leo is fixed, young, the second archetype of the fire element, which is the self-actualizing process that began in the first house in Aries. In the fifth house, we now have an ego, a self-image that we developed in the fourth house in the moon, in Cancer. This self-image is now projected outward as our personality. We build on everything we have learned through the first four houses, our values and priorities and what we need to survive, our conceptual understanding of the world around us, and our sense of who we are. Leo and the fifth house formats how we find our purpose in the world. Pluto and the fifth house people can feel that they have a unique destiny to fulfill. They are born with a feeling of specialness and need to be recognized. Sometimes this need is so intense that it can become a bottomless pit of need to be the center of attention. They can feel the universe revolves around them just as the sun is the center of the solar system. Many fifth house Plutos have had past lives in which they were somehow recognized as unique. They have unconscious memories of this special treatment and can intentionally expect to be treated and acknowledged in this way again. One danger is that they can feel that they somehow have a mission and over-aggrandize their importance. They feel like they are the apex, the point, the peak of the pyramid. They unintentionally project the force of their self-actualization and purpose onto those around them. They can be very giving and generous, yet the generosity often serves some personal need for recognition. With their Pluto polarity point in the 11th house, they need to move out of the small, often selfish space and begin to share their vitality, love of life, and unique destiny, if there is one, with their community. They need to recognize that everyone is the center of their own universe and to allow the room for others to express their individuality. Ultimately, the overexuberance results in crisis, opening for work on the self, and the next sign of Virgo. And we have here William Blake. William Blake was an English poet and engraver known for his seemingly simple poems containing complex themes and their companion illustrations in prints. As an artist, he is known for devising an innovative technique for colored engravings called illuminated printing, and was primarily homeschooled. His family worked in the hosiery business and as a small tradesman, and money was tight, but they weren't poor. Ideologically, his parents were dissenters who challenged the church's teachings, but they used the Bible and religious passages to interpret events of the world around them. Blake was raised with a sense that the righteous would triumph over the privileged. Growing up, Blake was considered, quote, different and homeschooled. At age 8 or 10, he reported seeing angels and spangled stars. He was exposed to Michelangelo's works. From 10 to 14, he went to drawing school, and after that, he started his apprenticeship with an engraver, where he stayed for the next 7 years. Blake was sent to Westminster Abbey to draw the tombs of England's ancient kings and queens. This Gothicized Blake's imagination as he acquired a feeling of the medieval, proved to be a lasting influence throughout his career. So we can see that he has Pluto and Sagittarius in his 5th house, ruled by Jupiter at 0 degrees, the most intense saturation of Sagittarius in the 5th house. This is a double Sagittarian archetype. His self-actualization was driven by an intense zest for life, a restlessness for life and creativity, and the need to connect with what was greater than himself, Sagittarius. The Pluto polarity point is in Gemini in the 11th house. It's ruled by Mercury and Scorpio in the 5th, conjunct Jupiter. The need to express this connection, this was the need to express this connection through his life expression. Obviously, you can see that Jupiter is threaded through his entire Pluto paradigm. Pluto in Capricorn in the 6th is ruled by Saturn and Pisces in the 7th. His personal growth was directed as an expression of what is divine, Pisces. And Pluto in Cancer in the 12th, Moon in Cancer in the 12th, deep compassion and connection to divinity. His Uranus in Pisces in the 9th squares Pluto. Pluto with Sagittarius in the 5th house. So Neptune in Leo was retrograde in the 1st as the ruler of this. There was highly individuated life expression through his poetry and his art. And Sedna in Pisces retrograde squares Pluto and Sagittarius, both again ruled by Jupiter at 0 degrees of Sagittarius in his 5th house. It was his life expression as higher knowledge. He lived, drew, created, and engraved higher knowledge. The Moon in Cancer in 12th is conjunct the North Node of Pluto in Cancer. He has intended to find this passionate, emotional, intensely spiritual pursuit in this lifetime and in the lifetimes going forward. This was ruled by Venus in Capricorn. Excuse me, Venus in Capricorn. Now, Venus in Capricorn in the 6th house is conjunct the South Node of Pluto in Capricorn, and this is ruled by Saturn and Pisces in the 7th. There was this generative creativity focused on the search for divinity. Black Moon Lilith retrograding Leo is trining Pluto. Again, Pluto and Sag. Again, so we have the Sun in Sag in 5th. There was this fringe lifestyle of consensus beliefs. And Pluto in the Sagittarius in the 5th is conjunct Eris, Sagittarius in 5th. A lot of Sagittarian energy in this chart. Again, ruled by Jupiter at 0 Sag. There was this intense connection to nature and the true nature of reality. And Juno in Virgo in the 3rd house squares Pluto in Sagittarius. Ruled by Mercury, Jupiter ruled by Mercury in Scorpio. This deep commitment to natural law. The 6th house correlates to Mercury's inner yin expression in Virgo. The polarity of Virgo is Pisces. These folks are Virgo souls. In Pisces, we go up on the mountain to seek spiritual enlightenment. In Virgo, we must come back down to earth to do the work, carry water, and chop wood. Virgo is specifically the archetype of work on the self. The 6th house in Virgo are about growth through crisis. Coming on the heels of overly exuberant Leo, the soul now needs to refine its nature so that it can be in a relationship with others in Libra in society. Buddhists call this takma, polishing the stone to make it a gem. Virgos are experiencing the crises created by an overabundance of ego expression. As human beings, we do not learn through mental inspiration or understanding. We learn through direct emotional experience. This is the foundation of the work on the self in Virgo. We don't generally think of Virgo as either creative or spiritual, but it is both. Some astrologers suggest that Chiron rules Virgo. Chiron's root word is Chairo, the Greek word for the hand. Virgos are masters of handiwork. They can create exquisite works that have practical as well as decorative use. And people born with Pluto in the sixth house have been learning to be of service. They have been learning humility, discrimination, and self-improvement. They develop these qualities through intense self-analysis. There is a reflective quality to their approach through life. The contrast to others begins the self-examination. In the sixth house, we are not yet in relationship, but we are in contact with others. We make comparisons with ourselves and the other. The pyramid that was upright in Leo is inverted at Virgo. Virgos often feel not good enough, being at the bottom of the heap with everyone else above them. Their self-perceived flaws and personality imperfections are readily apparent. This contrast to others begins the process of self-examination. With the Pluto polarity point in the 12th house, they learn to simplify and dissolve the mental constructs they have created about their lack of confidence. There's a need to purge the excesses of the ego and the need for perfection. Once they complete this work, they can be in relationship with others and join the rest of society as equals. And here we have Sigmund Freud. Sigmund Freud was the father of psychoanalysis. He was a physiologist, medical doctor, psychologist, and influential thinker of the early 20th century. Freud might be called the most influential intellectual of his age. His creation of psychoanalysis was a theory of the human psyche, a therapy for relieving its ills, and a method for interpreting culture and society. Despite repeated criticisms, attempted refutations, and qualifications of Freud's work, it remained powerful after his death and in fields far removed from psychology as it is narrowly defined. If, as the American sociologist Philip Reif once contended, psychological man replaced much earlier notions as political, religious, or economic man in the 20th century's dominant image, it is no small measure due to the power of Freud's vision and the seemingly inexhaustibility and intellectual legacy he left behind. Psychoanalysis was the first formal theory of personality influenced by Sigmund Freud. Freud divided personality into three levels: the conscious, the preconscious, and the unconscious. The Oedipus complex is the boy who is in love with his mother and fears castration if his father finds out about his fantasies. In the Electra complex, the girl is in love with her father and desires to have a penis as a genital organ. Freud believed that dreams represented repressed desires, fears, and conflicts. Sigmund Freud's theory of personality, the stages of consciousness, and its constant battle often paint a very negative picture of human life. The ego constantly has to battle the id and its selfish demands, and the superego intercedes, trying hard to aid the id in calming down and strengthening the ego. As such, our mind is constantly at war, our ego constantly battling off the evil id and losing every battle. According to some, Freud's theory was initially based on his own personal experiences and memories, hence lacking experimental and scientific proof. So Freud was born with Pluto and Capricorn in the 6th, ruled by Saturn and Gemini in the 8th. He was empowered by his ideas. The Pluto polarity point is in Cancer in the 12th house, ruled by the moon in Gemini in his 8th. He had the narrow idea that consciousness is fixated on the sexual organs of behavior. His sun in Mercury is excuse me. Her sun Mercury, Uranus, is in Taurus, sheltered in hard and fast beliefs and ideas. The north node of Pluto is in Cancer in the 6th. The south node of Pluto is in Capricorn in the 3rd. Capricorn is ruled by Saturn and Gemini in the 8th. He had previous lifetimes studying human nature, many previous lifetimes, series of them. Pallas Athena in Taurus in the 6th house is conjunct Pluto, in Capricorn in the 6th. And Vesta in Taurus in the 6th house is also conjunct Pluto and Capricorn, ruled by Venus in Aries in the 6th. He had a stubborn adherence to what he thought and believed. This is how you can reach me. My readings direct you towards finding your purpose in life that will lead you to live your passion. I write frequent blogs and forecasts on my website, evolutionaryastrologer.net. These are my social web addresses. My email is daniel@evolutionaryastrologer.net to contact me for a reading. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this YouTube. I appreciate all comments, those which praise my work and those which suggest better ways that I can present the material in a better way. Thanks for tuning in. See you next time.